All right, and so resuming now with Gravity's Rainbow, I have had to take a break due to other commitments. I've been teaching an 8-week seminar on Carl Jung and also working on a seminar on Apocalypse Now, and so that has eaten up quite a bit of my time. But I do want to continue with Gravity's Rainbow, and I'll keep working on it as we get through it. Here we'll end part one with the last three episodes 19, 20, and 21. And I'll work on it intermittently as I have time. So I've seen a number of you commenting, I hope you didn't walk away from the project. That's not the plan. This is part of a book on literature that I'm working about. So this will be turned into a book at some point. But it's going to be a long process because these books take a long time to read. And then they take even longer as I translate them into videos. I can only do one or two of these a day. Okay, so to resume then, we're at episode 19. And here we have a flashback to 1929, 2930, near the end of the Weimar Republic, where we have these two characters, Franz and Lenny Perkler, who made a brief appearance in episode 8. And now it is from their point of view. And they are a troubled married couple who aren't getting along very well. We have a number of flash forwards and flashbacks regarding their relationship. She's been having an affair with Peter Zaxa. And Peter Zaxa now, remember, is the dead guy on the other side that Carol Eventier has been consulting, and as we saw in the previous chapter, has been consulting. And so we flash back to when he was still alive, and Lenny Perkler was having an affair with him. She was dissatisfied with her marriage with Franz. It isn't a good match, apparently, and they have a daughter named Ilsa, and it's very complicated. Part of the problem is that Franz Perkler is in the SS, and he's a scientist. I believe he's a chemist. I'm not 100% certain at this point. I'm pretty sure he's a chemist, and he's working on the rocket program, which at this point in the 1920s, before the Nazis have come into power, and Peenemünde hasn't even been built yet. That's not until 1937. So we're in 1929. Most likely the rockets are at Kummersdorf, where Franz Perkler stumbles upon an attempt of a launch of one of them, probably an A1 or an A2, something like that at Kummersdorf. And so that's the period that we're in here. And now Franz is a rationalist, a scientist, a cause and effect man, as Pynchon calls him here. And she, on the other hand, is into astrology. Astrology is her main thing. And he thinks astrology is ridiculous because it has no rational explanation. Let me find the passage where he's arguing with her. And he says that there's no way for astrology to work because it's not based on anything. Where is it? Right here. It's not based on... anyways, they have an argument, and the point of the argument is that he rejects astrology. He's a Pisces, by the way, and she is a Cancer. So they're both water signs. So you would think that they would have a compatibility. Cancer as a water sign is a little more pragmatic and domestic than Pisces as a water sign, which is a little more mystically inclined. Although not in my case, because I'm a Cancer, and I'm very mystically inclined, not pragmatic in the slightest bit. This is partially one of the reasons why, even though I follow astrology and know it very well, I don't trust the zodiac much. Primarily because there has been a slippage of 23.5 degrees due to the precession of the equinoxes. So I don't take sun signs terribly seriously. The reference to the zodiac is off. That's just a fact of the matter. But what works is the angles formed by the planets, the angles that they form, and the transits that are made are 100% reliable and predictable, and the archetypes involving the planets. I don't worry so much about the zodiac precisely because of the precessional slippage. But his argument with her is that it doesn't work because there's no cause and effect. You can't have something that far out there just causing something here. And so this is the rationalists' misunderstanding of what astrology is all about. And what they think it's about is that the planets are causing something to happen on the Earth. They are not. That is not what astrology is doing. It has to do with timing. It has to do with coincidence of events on the Earth with this sort of cosmic clock that we are embedded in. We're embedded in a system, a solar system that is like an organism. It has its own organic internal complexity, and it has its own internal rhythm and clock. That's what the planets are. They tell you what time your life is. And the events in your life correspond to planetary constellations of archetypes. For example, if you get Saturn and Pluto in aspect, you are going to have a very rough time. Saturn and Pluto are the two worst planets to get on your case. The transits last over an agonizing 3 or 4 years because Pluto moves so slowly, and you're going to have a rough time. Many people commit suicide under that transit, as my grandfather did, for instance, who was a rocket scientist. So, and that's what she says. She says it has nothing to do with cause and effect. She can't articulate herself, so she doesn't know about the explaining that it's a kind of synchronicitous type thing. So, again, this continues Pynchon's discussions of causality versus acausal systems, what Jung called synchronicity, which was his explanation for astrology, that it's an acausal connecting principle. In other words, it has nothing to do with causality, but nonetheless, it is a different type of connection that has to do with connection through time and also through space. But so Franz and Lenny Perklers, so their marriage is in trouble, and she's mystically inclined. It's not a good match, and so she's having an affair with Peter Zoxa, who, as it turns out, is a medium. He is also a medium. So Carol Eventier has been contacting him on the other side, and they are both mediums. So Peter Zoxa, we find out, was a medium, and so she's having an affair with him. Now, Franz Perkler will go to work for the SS at Peenemünde. He'll work on the rockets. And in this section here, in the middle of episode 19, he stumbles upon a rocket launching, probably an A1. Pynchon doesn't say. He just describes it as a silver egg that blows up. It doesn't work. But he also meets Kurt Mondaugen there. Now, the last time we saw Kurt Mondaugen was in V, in chapter 9, from which we have already met Weissmann again, where he was Lieutenant Weissmann. Now in Gravity's Rainbow, he's Captain Weissmann. And Kurt Mondaugen had gone to South Africa to study spherics, atmospheric electromagnetic acoustic effects, something like that. It was very vague science, kind of radio-oriented. And he went there to Namibia in 1922 as this sort of young guy, naive guy, where he saw Vera Merving and her S&M affair with Weissmann. And so he's from there now. This is 1929, so he's been back from South Africa for a little while. And there's a brief interaction between him and Franz Perkler. And they have a daughter, newborn Ilsa. Later on, Ilsa will wind up in one of the concentration camps, and I believe Lenny does also. Specifically Dora, though, which is the camp from which labor was drawn to use for the building of the rockets at Nordhausen. Once the British in 1943 bombed Peenemünde, then they moved it to Mittelwerke in Nordhausen and went underground into a mountain. And that's where they brought slave labor from Dora there. And Ilsa will their daughter will wind up there. I think Lenny Perkler does too, if I remember right. And he has an incestuous affair with Ilsa. So always with Pynchon, there's all these incredible complications, especially sexual ones. So they have these. So it's very complex, the relationship with this little family that Pynchon introduces us to here. And Lenny has spent this whole chapter pretty much having sexual fantasies. There's a Jewish girlfriend of hers named Rebecca that she wants to have sex with, although she doesn't and hasn't, but she's just fantasizing about it and fantasizing about other men throughout, and wants Peter Zoxa to realize that their relationship is just, she doesn't belong to him in any sense. She wants freedom. She winds up eventually as a prostitute, as we'll see, with whom Slothrop has sex later on. So this family is in degeneration. They're in a state of decline here. And then so who they're channeling now, when they go to this seance, where Peter Zoxa now is channeling Walter Rathenau. Now Rathenau he was an industrialist, and he was kind of the Albert Speer of World War I. Albert Speer was Hitler's primary architect and right-hand man for designing cities and so forth. And he played that role for about 11 months during World War I. And he was an industrialist, but he was also Jewish. And he became, after World War I, he became the foreign minister, and he instituted the Treaty of Rapallo, which allowed the Germans to have trade relations with Russia. and the Russians knew they were helping illegally to rearm Germany in this treaty that Rathenau made. But he was regarded as left-wing, and he was assassinated by a right-wing party. I've forgotten the name of the right-wing party, the radicals that assassinated him in 1922. They killed him. So he's been dead since 1922, and he was very pro-business, very pro-cartel. He was very interested in rebuilding the German economy based on this new idea of corporations and cartels, and he had connections with I.G. Farben. And so Pynchon now is getting back down into the idea of here come the corporations, which are the new power players, actually hidden more or less behind the scenes in World War II, which you think is a screen facade of an old-fashioned nation-state conflict, but it really isn't. The corporations are behind it. Now they start surfacing into view here with this seance. So they start channeling Walter Rathenau, and Peter Saksa talks, and Rathenau talks through him. And Rathenau starts talking about, he gives a long and complex history here of organic chemistry, and he's talking about, I'm not knowledgeable enough about this to really go into detail. I wish I was, but he starts talking about the invention of the color mauve in 1856, which was synthesized in 1856, I believe, by the British. And mauve, Pynchon points out, was the first new color in history ever to be invented. And it became a big deal. Queen Victoria showed up in a mauve dress. Everyone was wearing mauve. Mauve this, mauve that. And then eventually they created a bunch of other new colors. And then Rathenau tells them that there is a relationship, too, between coal and steel. Consider coal and steel. And the relationship has to do with the fact that they're connected by means of this substance called coal tar, which apparently is a very oily, messy, unpleasant substance from which, however, all kinds of things can be made. A whole rainbow of new colors, such as indigo, will be synthesized from this. What are the colors here? There was a bunch of them that he gave. You learn a lot from reading Pynchon about the origins of things. Now I don't see where the color list is, but indigo was another one of the new ones, and alizarin, I think, is another one. And there's a General Director Smaragd, which means emerald. The general director from I.G. Farben is here listening to the medium channeling Walter Rathenau. He has lots of interest because he's the director of I.G. Farben. So they're getting all this advice from Rathenau in the history, and it gives Pynchon an opportunity to give a brief history of organic chemistry here in the end of the chapter. Very fascinating stuff. I love how he weaves all this stuff together. So that's 19, and we'll see the Perklers again later on in concentration camps and in prostitution, and Franz working on the V rockets. So not much, a very unfortunate, misfortunate family here. So then in episode 20, we have a Christmas Eve party at Pisces, told from the point of view of a pointsman who has been drugging himself up with both uppers and downers. I forget what they're called, amphetamine sulfate and so forth. And he's thinking about all the drugs he's taking while this girl named Maud Chilks suddenly grabs him, pulls him into a closet, and gives him a blowjob. And while he's thinking about, while she's sucking him off, he's thinking about all these different drugs that he's been on and all the chemicals that he's been on. And all of a sudden he realizes he's coming. And then that's it. Lucky him, Pointsman doesn't get it much. Remember, we learned that women don't like him, but Maud Chilks apparently doesn't. She does something like, she's in charge of the finances of Pisces. So then he's drunk, and Thomas Gwenhydwy approaches him, and they go out for a stroll, and they have a conversation. They're drunk and cracking jokes, and then Gwenhydwy starts in with this paranoid idea of what he calls the paranoid city, and he says, have you noticed that the rockets mostly have been falling on the East End? And that's where I am, on the East End, and that's of course where all the Preterite are, the poor, Salvation Army, Jews, and so forth. And he has this paranoid idea that somehow it seems like the East End gets hit the hardest, not the West End, where the rich people live, north of the river. We're getting it south of the river and on the East End, mostly where the Preterite dwell. It's as though they were designed by fate to be wiped out first. So he has this paranoid idea that there's a paranoid city and a conspiracy to wipe out all the Preterite in England, and that the rockets are falling unevenly on the east end, which they naturally would, because the east part of the island is closer to The Hague. So that, naturally they would. So it is a bit paranoid. And Pointsman even takes up momentarily, comically, Roger Mexico's point of view, and he says, no, they're following a Poisson distribution. So now he's arguing. He'd been arguing with Mexico the whole time, and now he brings in Mexico's argument to counter Gwen Hindley's paranoia. No, trust me, it's a statistical distribution. And he was trying to take that apart with Mexico as being causally reckless. So that's the kind of sort of conversation that they have here that ends that chapter. And then we go to a brief final chapter, chapter 21, episode 21 here at the end, which is just a couple of pages, which is now Roger Mexico and Jessica Swan Lake are, this is Boxing Day, December 26th, when the British exchange their gifts. So we've got 9 days here from December 18th to the 26th. And also one last thing about the previous episode is Pointsman thinking about Tyrone Slothrop as a miracle child, as a wunderkind, on Christmas Eve, as an ironic and satiric inversion of the Christ nativity myth. In a way, he thinks of Slothrop as his child, his miraculous child. Okay, so Mexico and Swaldnik are at her sister's, and we get a Pisces image right from the start. Inside the bowl, the two goldfish are making a Pisces sign, thus making it very clear that Pynchon intends this chapter to be, part one, to be associated with the astrological sign of Pisces, not just because it has the Pisces organization, but because that has been the theme of death and paranormal and the supernatural, visitations by angels and so forth, all through this wonderful book so far, part one. So Roger has taken them, the sister, and I think her kid, Penelope, to go see a play production of Hansel and Gretel. Now, when last Pynchon referenced Hansel and Gretel was in the chapter on Weissmann, who was having threesomes with Gottfried and Katja Borgesius, and making Katja and Gottfried play the role of Hansel and Gretel in his little S&M bondage games. And so Roger takes them to see a play of Hansel and Gretel, which is momentarily disrupted by a V2 landing somewhere nearby that scares the kids in the audience. And the character playing Hansel sings a merry song, calms everyone down, gets them to participate in the song. It's one of Pynchon's funny songs. And then when they get home, Penelope, the niece of Jessica, sees the ghost of her dead father. And he shows up in the kitchen. She's the only one who sees him. And he says, I only want to visit you. And she says, you want to possess me. Demonic possessions in this house are not unknown. Is this really Keith, her father? Taken when she was half her present age and returned now, is not the man she knew, but only the shell. A process by which living souls unwillingly become the demons known to the main sequence of Western magic is the Qliphoth, shells of the dead. It's not really Western magic. The Qliphoth idea comes from Kabbalah, and it's one of the primary ideas of Kabbalah, with this idea that the Qliphoth are the fragments, the broken splinters and shards from the original cosmic vessels that contained the emanation of God and God's power in those vessels. But it was too much for the vessels to hold, so they shattered and broke, and it descended into the fragments, which are this world, the broken one. Which is why Doris Lessing, by the way, in her wonderful novel Shikasta, which I want to do at some point, calls the planet Earth Shikasta, which means the broken one. In her language, her alien language that she makes up, it's the broken one. She too is aware of the myth of the Qliphoth, of the shells, and the tikkun is the necessity of the restoration by gathering up the shells. The process and task of the human being is to gather the fragments back together to achieve the cosmic wholeness once again. And so Pynchon references this myth quite a bit, this Kabbalistic myth of the breaking of the vessels that are now fragments, Qliphoth. And then so it ends with, part one, it just ends with Roger being anxious about losing Jessica to Beaver, the other guy that she's two-timing him with, and he's worried about it. So then that brings us to the conclusion of part one of Gravity's Rainbow, and which has been 21 episodes. And next we'll do part 2, Un Perm au Casino Hermann Goering, a furlough to the Hermann Goering Casino. And we'll proceed from there. And it begins with, we'll catch up with Tyrone Slothrop and see what sorts of exploits that he's up to now.